Okay, our next session is with Carl Teichrib. Did I say that right, Carl?
That's close enough.
That's close enough for somebody from Texas. And Carl is a Canadian.
Correct.
So we're starting to bring that American, Canadian,
there we go.
all stuff together there. And he graduated from Bible College in Canada, and he has become, I think, one of the top experts on globalism in the United States. And he actually, for many years, has gone and attended many of these big-time globalist conferences, more on the political, religious side of things. And so he's going to be talking about that and perhaps how it relates to the European Union and those kinds of things. No, that's another guy. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. And so, let her rip.
All right. Well, thank you very much. A couple of points I want to clarify. While I'm listed as Dr. Carl Teichrib and I have an honorary degree, I'm just Carl. That's how I like it. So don't worry about the doctor title. Secondly, I'm not a prophecy expert. I go and speak at prophecy events, but I'm not a prophecy expert. Rather, what I do is I take a look at how major trends from history up into the contemporary time period are shaping and changing and challenging Christianity. I edit a publication called Forcing Change, which is exactly that, the idea of how we are seeing our Western world forced into changing itself and remaking itself. And finally, there's going to be some slides that are a little bit different than your presentation. I've added just a couple of touches here or there, but it's pretty much the same all the way around. So with those little caveats in place, let's begin. Welcome, global citizens. Those were the words of introduction and opening to the 1997 Global Citizenship 2000 Youth Congress, the very first internationalist event that I had the opportunity of attending. Robert Mueller, a United Nations high official, was the keynote speaker, and the audience was comprised of educators, teachers, administrators, community activists, and students. Students going all the way from kindergarten up to the university level. What was the point? What was the point? 1,000 days before the year 2000, we would hammer through the idea of a world core curriculum and how this would look for Canada's education system. That was the goal, to integrate Robert Mueller's World Core curriculum into our educational platform and all that entailed. So, here's just a few of the things that were talked about. We all received symbolic global citizenship passports, and in it the word said, "You are the earth becoming conscious of herself. Unite, global citizens, to save and heal planet Earth." During one of the times that he had a conversation with all of us in the room, he described it this way about ourselves and our relationship to the earth. You are not children of Canada. Remember his audience. You are not children of Canada. You are really living units of the cosmos, because the earth is a cosmic phenomena. We are all cosmic units. This is why religions tell you, you are divine. We are divine energy. It is in your hands whether evolution on this planet continues or not. So during the course of the 3 days of this particular event, we had all kinds of ideas that were floated around amongst the audience. And he described himself and his role as a global role model to us, as a person who had been very involved in working towards globalism, internationalism, world federalism. And he held a very high rank in the United Nations for many, many years. He helped create 11 United Nations specialized agencies. He boasted to us that he was the father behind the scenes of the coming United Religions Initiative, and we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. And he was a strong supporter of world federalism and world government. And so he said things like, so you have a fantastic future, just come up with an idea. And the schools that participated came up with ideas. Lots of them. Here are just a few of them that were presented to us. Starting a school-based interfaith group or global citizenship clubs. We need to foster things like earth pride and celebrate our global oneness, celebrate our global identity. One particular school came up with this radical idea: zero world debt and issue biometric cards with earth points to replace money. Other talk within the schools were to instill global spiritual and ethical values, and the working group that I was sitting in with was comprised mainly of university students who would become the new educators. And they recognized that this was a spiritual ideology and that it had political, economic, and cultural application. And so it was discussed this way: make this a virus. No inoculation. Infect everyone. This fits with what Benjamin Kidd, a British social thinker from the turn of the last century, discussed with his idea of integrating, humanity becoming one in our power. The idea here is that the individual must integrate into the group. The group then must integrate into the cosmic, into the universal. And we will become one, and our power will be exhibited through our oneness. This is what Benjamin Kidd said in 1918. Consider carefully the role of youth. Civilization is absolutely invincible once it realizes the secret of its own unity. The influence of a collective ideal imposed on the mind of the young under conditions of emotion is incalculable. Give us the young, and we will create a new mind and a new earth in a single generation. Power, in its highest expression, is a science of organizing the individual mind in the service of the universal. Truth is nothing else than this science of power. We will become powerful through our collective unity. We will exert our oneness. This is what Benjamin Kidd was presenting back almost 100 years ago, 1918. Do we see examples of that today? Loaded. Our whole milieu, our culture is completely wrapped up in the idea of what we can do collectively. We have all kinds of illustrations and examples of global thinking, international designs, ideas, global thought. And so today we're going to take a look at some of those and see how they fit together. But we are completely enmeshed with the idea that we are becoming one. Oneness is the new paradigm. We see this happening on all kinds of different fronts. And so today we're going to take a look at only 5. We're going to take a look at the human landscape. We will examine politics, religion, technology, and the last one, culture. Because if oneness is the dominant paradigm, not necessarily the correct one, it's not, but if it is the dominant paradigm, then even culture will reflect that. And so today I'm going to only give you a survey, and that's all we're going to do, a survey of those 5 points. Each of these are presentations that I give that are typically an hour. Some of them are longer in length that go into this in much more detail, including the cultural aspect. So today you're getting a survey of human unity in 5 points. Let's find, first of all, a biblical example of human unity. We have had some discussion on Genesis 11. Turn over to it. We'll read it quickly. Genesis 11, verses 1 to 9. You know the events well. This is the Tower of Babel. Let's read this together. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. There's a lot going on in this passage, an awful lot. First, in verse 1, we see that they are one in their communication. And then they begin to build not just a tower. No, not just a tower, but a tower city complex. We always focus on the tower, but there was more going on than just that single edifice. What was the purpose? To reach into heaven, to make a name for themselves, lest we be scattered. Unity is the front and center concept behind building this structure and the city around it. And then in verse 6, we see that this is a defiling act. We see that within the Hebrew, that this is an act that defiles or profanes. And what they are looking to achieve, again in the Hebrew, the concept that we find is that they are making a formation of battle. They are gathering together against something. What happens? God comes down. He imposes judgment. The people disperse. The project stops. We find a lot of things going on here. Here's just a few ideas or a few points to touch on. Here we see at the Tower of Babel the idea of defining our own purpose. We are self-naming, we are self-identifying, we are coming together in our unity and in our power. This defines who we are. This defines our purpose. It is a declaration of pursuing our own order. Just as we see in Genesis chapter 3, there's a declaration of, in a sense, of pursuing our own order. We see this now collectively. We are going to do this together. And here we define ourselves and our order. We also will look at this as framing our own security. Here, this becomes our fortification. This becomes our safety point. And it is an act of idolatry, as it represents faith in our works, faith in ourselves. These are just some of the things that you pull from this particular passage. And there's a lot more going on. So, let's take a brief look then at 5 points, 5 areas where globalism is now being expressed. We're going to take a look at architecture of all things, the idea of the human landscape. And so here I want to suggest a few ideas to you, such as an international world capital. In 1913, an American architect living in Rome proposed the idea of an international world capital. That was his terminology, his wording. And he sent around the world a thick book outlining where this world capital should be located, different suggested places, and what it would look like, what it would mean. At the center of this world city would be a tower of progress dedicated to upholding man's capability, his strength, his unity. There would be around it housed international scientific congresses, a temple of religion, an international bank. This is what the architect Heinrich Andersen said in his 1913 document. The tower, which will form the chief feature of both center and city, was conceived as symbolic of our faith in unity. It is literally a symbolic representation of our power in unity. And there you see a picture of one of the concept drawings that the architect had regarding the city tower complex. Page 11 of his thick document says this: "A change is now felt throughout the entire world. A divine responsibility governs our actions. As we are one with the past, so must we be one with the future. Man's strength can only come through world unification, peace, and fellowship. A grandeur coalescence, a world centralization." Then he went on. "Humanity's rising in majestic dignity from earth to heaven, the embodiment of the universal soul mounting in appealing harmony towards the divine source of life. Humanity's mission is to realize that kingdom of heaven on earth, vision from within by the spirit of man." Well, what happened after 1913? Right, we went to war. Well, you folks didn't. You took a little bit of time as Americans. But as Canadians, 1914, we're already on the battlefield. World War I erupts. Man's idea of unity shattered, gone. What's so interesting about that time period is it also was a deep call, a resonating call for world government. Here's another example, the Soviet Palace, literally entitled The Palace of the Soviets. It was to be built in the 1930s, and it was to be a tower city complex just opposite of the Kremlin that would hearken to itself international solidarity, uniting the workers of the world together under a statue of Lenin capping the top of its tower. It began on December the 5th, 1931, by imploding the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. Of course. And construction did begin. Foundations were worked on, materials were brought in. It was a slow project because it was a monumental project. It was huge. And then, as the late 1930s rolled around, and then as World War II erupts, it comes to a halt. In fact, Nazi Germany would use the war materials located on site as a bombing target in Moscow during World War II to try to obliterate their war materials that were stockpiled at this location because there's so much steel and so much other materials accumulated to build this palace of the Soviets. World War II shatters the dream. Well, the idea of world unity can also be seen through this illustration, and that is the European Parliament in Strasbourg, modeled after the famous painting about the Tower of Babel. And you see on the one corner a European community poster, Europe, many tongues, one voice. This theme is there. This theme is speaking to us. We will unite. We will unite in power. And then my own Canadian Human Rights Museum. For those Canadians in this room, and I know there's a handful of us, you know some of the history of this already. We have a new museum, national museum, put in my capital city of Winnipeg. It is a Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and it has been just full of controversy because everybody wants to have their banner of whatever their human rights issue waved at this site. So every specialist group and lobbyist group is there saying, hey, include us, we've had so many things happen to us, blah, blah, blah. It's amazing what kind of a political firestorm you can ignite over human rights. What's interesting, though, is the building itself was designed around the concept of unity. This is what Architect Week said in August 2011. The Museum for Human Rights finds its archetype in the biblical Tower of Babel, described in the book of Genesis. And then the architect, Predok, says this. The idea that this is rooted in humanity, making visible in the architecture the fundamental commonality of humankind. A symbolic apparition of ice, clouds, and stone set in a field of sweetgrass. The creation of a unifying and timeless landmark for all nations and cultures of the world. And at this tower, in this building, and it's now open, it opened up this fall with much controversy, you go through the bottom layers and see all the different static displays, and you wind yourself up to the very top, to what's called the Tower of Hope. And there, looking across this expanse of the Manitoba prairies, you will be enlightened regarding human rights and the necessity for humankind to come together in unity. These are just some of the ideas in terms of building the city of man. And that is indeed the title of a book published in the 1960s by Warren Wager. This is what he said regarding this concept that mankind is unifying, coming together. That this is the dream of an integrated world order, that it is one of the oldest rational visions of civilized man. In a sense, it created civilization. The idea here is simple. We will build our own order. We will build. We will unify. So that's just one sample. How about in terms of politics? Do we see world unity around the idea of politics? Well, absolutely, without question. And here's just a few early examples from your own country. Teddy, your president, Teddy Roosevelt, firmly believed in world government. Back in 1910, during his Nobel lecture, he called for a world federation for international peace and justice. He described the necessity of an international police force, and that whoever could do this would win the admiration of the world. Whoever could achieve world unity politically around a world federation would be the global rock star. Of course, he didn't use that kind of language, but you get the idea. And then, during World War I, the beginning, 1914, Nicholas Murray Butler, who was the president of Columbia University, and incidentally, at that point in time, Mr. International, there wasn't a place that he couldn't go. Kings, queens, prime ministers, and presidents flocked to Nicholas Murray Butler, and he had an open door wherever he went, in positions of high places. He was Mr. International. This is what he said in 1914. The time will come when each nation will deposit in a world federation some portion of its sovereignty for the general good. When this happens, it will be possible to establish an international executive and an international police, both devised for the special purpose of enforcing the decision of the International Court. This is 1914. World War II brought out all kinds of ideas of world unity. In fact, World War II births the World Federalist concept, the World Federalist community, which is an organized movement that exists still today, as you will find out, dedicated solely to bring about world government, global unity, international peace, through a federated world order. This movement was birthed during World War II. All kinds of things happened during World War II, pushing mankind towards world unity. The Federal Council of Churches put together a special commission under the headship of John Foster Dulles to look at world government as one of the possible ways of bringing about world peace. The Federal Council of Churches, the Methodist Council of Bishops, Northern Baptist Convention, the Congregational Church, all of them had world order movements and crusades and committees pushing for world unity. We even saw things like resolutions in state houses, different bills that came up promoting and pushing world government. Here's an example. The General Assembly of North Carolina solemnly declare that all peoples of the earth should now be united in a commonwealth of nations to be known as the Federation of the World. This was a big dream. And if you take a look and dig below the surface at the United Nations, this was the ideas and the foundation that birthed the United Nations. In fact, it was a sad day after the United Nations did come about because it didn't go as far as those who advocated hoped it would. Winston Churchill was a believer in this. A lot of people don't realize, but Winston Churchill, after World War II, went all around the world promoting internationalism, the idea of a global collective. Here's from his May 14th, 1947 speech. The creation of an authoritative, all-powerful world order is the ultimate aim toward which we must strive. Unless some effective world supergovernment can be set up and brought quickly into action, the prospects for peace and human progress are dark and doubtful. 1947. I got a little bit of a taste of this the last time I was in Dallas, which was in 1999. In 1999, I attended the World Federalist Association's Fall Assembly. The World Federalist Association has now been renamed, is your country's most effective and most vocal advocate for world government. That's the purpose of it. And so, in 1999, I say we because I was embedded with this organization, we had our Fall Assembly right here in the Dallas area. Some of the things we discussed, well, there was a celebration in the fact that the World Federalist community was successful in birthing the International Criminal Court. You see, that was us. That was the World Federalist movement and the World Federalist community that birthed the International Criminal Court. They had been hot on it already for over a decade before, and they had moved successfully to have the adoption of the ICC. A lot of discussion about creating a global people's parliament, which incidentally is still on the roster. And the idea that through the Millennium process, all the various United Nations Millennium Summits, we could push global governance even further. There's myself, a much younger self, without gray hair, with Maurice Strong. Maurice Strong was also at that event. Maurice Strong is from my home province, and I was able to spend the better part of a day with the man. And he advocated that what we would be seeing is not the destruction of nation states, rather simply just another layer of governance placed over top, as you now have city, county, municipality governments, you have therefore state government, federal government, one more layer over it. But you can keep your countries, as long as the country adheres to the greater global good. Those are some of the ideas that were talked about right in your neck of the woods in 1999. I saw this as well in 2000 when I was at the United Nations Millennium Forum. Here we discussed that the United Nations was man's best hope indeed. And so the working group that I was a part of, which was a working group on reestablishing the international order, very strongly discussed the necessity for a global tax, an international currency, a United Nations-controlled police force, and that the United Nations itself should oversee the world's financial system. These were some of the ideas that were discussed. Now, I'll tell you right off the bat, not everybody there gets along with everybody. Not at all. I was in this working group dealing on a global parliament, setting up a world parliament structure, which incidentally is still in motion, as I said earlier. And the room was full, and the moderator had his idea of how to set this in motion. And so he put a resolution forward in the creation of a global people's assembly. And somebody else in the room disagreed on a finer point. They're all there for the same reason. They're all there to promote and push this. And somebody else had another idea. And after 3 hours of arguing and bickering and some real hostile talk, people ended up leaving. By the time it was said and done, after 3 hours, we might have had just a handful of us left in the room. And the moderator, this is democracy, and the moderator slams his gavel down. By consensus, we will go with my original resolution. Beautiful. Hey, gets a point done, right? We had consensus. This is the stuff that does get talked about, ladies and gentlemen. This is not conspiracy theory. This is business. Big, big business. Here's one of the documents that were circulated at the United Nations Millennium Forum. This is, I'm not going to try to pronounce the gentleman's name, but he is from Kazakhstan. By the way, Kazakhstan has a very strong desire to be a leader in terms of developing human unity. They have major interfaith events there. They have world government meetings there. Kazakhstan is a player in some respects. A lot of folks don't know it. This document was circulated to us entitled Transformation of the World. Listen to it. The world does need a civilized coordinator in international relations and in settling global problems. More than that, this coordinator must be a stabilizing factor, actually, the last-ditch authority on the earth. He must win confidence of each man and each nation. People must be stark sure that this coordinator would solve any problem in a just and humane way. And one should be sure that in him we would find understanding and sympathy, that he would treat any nation as his own son. Can the world community do without a coordinator? Definitely not. Wow. Wow. I sat there and I read through it at the United Nations Millennium Forum, and your jaw is dragging behind you as you're walking down the hallway. This is pretty powerful. This is a declaration, isn't it? An interesting declaration. By the way, the picture there of the World King, and that's how he's described, comes out of that particular document. A little bit more forward. In 2012, I had the opportunity of going to the World Federalist Movement's International Congress in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Now, the World Federalist community was birthed out of World War II. As I said earlier, its goal is world government. And every 5 years, they meet in a global city to hash out their agenda, pushing forward the idea of world unity. And so, over the years, they've met in places like The Hague, New Delhi, Rome. They've met in New York. They've met all over the place. They've met in the Vatican. And they met with Pope Pius XII way back in the 1950s, who supported world federalism. I have the speech. It's there. So in 2012, they met in my province, Manitoba, in Winnipeg. Now, I know that there might only be a handful of folks here in this room who've been to Winnipeg. Who here has? Okay, you know it's not Tokyo or New York, don't you? It's like, I don't know, a little bit bigger than Omaha, maybe? It couldn't be, it couldn't be considered a world city. And yet they met in 2012 in Winnipeg. Why? For you Canadians in the room, you should be asking, why Winnipeg? Because Lloyd Axworthy was the international president. You get it. Lloyd Axworthy was, in the late 1990s, the same or the equivalent of your Secretary of State, okay? This is power politics. It would be like Hillary Clinton taking on the international headship of an organization like this. You'd be going, okay, that's serious. By the way, Hillary Clinton has had interactions with the World Federalist community. Did so especially in 1999. So what did we talk about at this event? We talked a lot about how we had to unite before we destroyed each other. And how when we see global calamity coming, when we see world crisis on the horizon, we need to have the structures in place so that we can birth a proper world government. As World War I birthed the League of Nations and World War II birthed the United Nations, the idea here was that the next true world calamity would birth a world government. Some of the ideas that we discussed, the concepts of creating, again, a world parliament came into play. Empowering the United Nations with a military element, such as a rapid reaction force, or responsibility to protect, which is a world federalist idea. Now, most folks in this room might not know what R2P is, responsibility to protect. It's the idea that the international community has a responsibility to go into a sovereign nation and engage in a military action if what's happening in that country doesn't fit the norms in terms of human rights. NATO and us going into Libya a few years ago was done under the banner of R2P. That was a World Federalist concept, recognizing that that was a stepping stone to the international policing idea that they have held for so long. And again, because they birthed the International Criminal Court, the other idea that they look to birth, and by the way, the United Nations is now talking about it, is that we need an international court for the environment, where we can start bringing offenders into a global judicial system. All this is waiting in the wings, and that's the idea of it for the next crisis. This is one of the images that was given to us or shown to us, and it's a web-based image. But here in the background you see wars and disasters looming. In the mountaintop we're all trying to achieve world federalism, world unity, and all the other related activities like education, raising your consciousness. And the 4 different roads that may take, such as transforming the United Nations, or integrating various regions, the European Union, an African Union. There's already talk in South Africa about integrating regions. We could look at uniting the democracies. That's the concept that helped birth NATO. Or we could create a global constitution and have this as an empowered system right off the bat. And the suggestion was that the World Federalist community, the world government community, needed to look at all of those roads with the hopes that one of them will be the right way when the next crisis hits. So, that's government. Are we moving towards unity in religions? Without question. Without question. So here I'm going to give you, again, a sampler of how this movement of integrating oneness within religions shapes up. First of all, let's take you back to Chicago, 1893. All of this, by the way, has historical setting, historical context. Nothing that we're talking about here was just birthed out of a vacuum, like poof, Friday it happened, or Monday after the weekend it happened. All of this has begun to take shape in a historical context. So in 1893, the world's religions met in Chicago for the first World Parliament of Religions. Incidentally, next year, 2015, they'll be meeting again in Salt Lake City for the 2015 installment of the World Parliament of Religions. This is from one of the speech excerpts. The religion of the future will be universal in every sense. It will embody all the thoughts and aspirations and virtues and emotions of all humanity. It will draw together all lands and peoples and kindreds and tongues into a universal brotherhood of love and service. It will establish upon earth a heavenly order. I saw that in the year 2000 when I attended the signing of the United Religions Initiative Global Charter. It took place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, And this was a movement, the idea of creating a type of a United Nations of religions. This is a movement that also had backing from the World Federalist community. And so at this particular event, we had Sikhs, we had Baha'i, we had Hindus, we had pagans, Wiccans, we had Christians, representatives of all kinds of various denominations, standing there and affirming that religions needed to come together for world peace. Religions needed to come together for world harmony. We needed to unite. And so this is just some of the pictures that I snapped when I was there. There's myself again and much younger Carl. But the idea here was birthed that we would have literally a United Nations of religions. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. But the idea was there. That germ of an idea was there. And they were modeling it in Pittsburgh. We've come a long way. Here's another example. This is where politics and religion comes together. In 2006, I attended the United Nations World Urban Forum, a United Nations event built around the discussion of how to properly manage and interact within the idea of global cities. Because cities are the place of culture. Cities are the place of security. They are the place of politics. How do we bring global cities into play as true international leaders? Especially when countries don't necessarily follow suit. So we had people from the IMF, people from the World Bank, people from the United Nations. This was a United Nations event, discussing the idea of global cities. Well, one of the working groups I sat in on was the area of religion and the city. Politics and religion. For one afternoon, in a room of about 300 people, they had brought together religious leaders, mayors from prominent cities, counselors, and politicians from various urban centers around the world. And they worked on the idea of what to do with religion and cities, global cities. Because we're about unity, right? We're about coming together, right? We're about bringing all this into one. It didn't become policy, but it was certainly talked about. And that is that counselors, politicians, mayors need to put in place bylaws that would outlaw any religious group, temple, or church that had exclusive truth claims in the core zones of their cities. Why? Because that divides. That is a division point. And instead of having churches with exclusive truth claims, we would open up interfaith centers, places for religious harmony. Again, it didn't become policy, but this is the talk. This is what was being discussed. Politics and religion do come together. And then this little winner of an event. By the way, 2 weeks ago at the G20 summit in Brisbane, Australia, there was also a religious summit that went along with it, an interfaith summit. In 2010, during the G8 political summit in Toronto, there was a parallel event taking place in Winnipeg, Manitoba, hosted by Lloyd Axworthy and his entourage of World Federalists. And they brought together religious leaders from literally around the world to talk about the necessity of oneness and world peace. And so the talk was that there is not only one way to God, there are many ways. We're all called to serve the God we know by so many names. You know what's interesting? Everybody knows about the political summits that take place, the G8, the G20, because there's cars being burned and there's rioting and looting and all the rest. But so few folks realize that for a number of years, there's been parallel interfaith religious summits that work hand in hand. Why? They develop policy that then gets transported and transferred to the political leadership with the hope that they can influence towards their idea of what unity will look like. So here's some of the different religious groups that were represented. The Baha'i community, no surprise because the Baha'is at their core hold to a prophecy, a belief that the world will become united, that there will be a world government, that there will be a single global currency, and indeed a single faith. And the Baha'i community works towards that end. even having land in Haifa with buildings dedicated to that. For those who've been in Haifa and who've seen some of those buildings, you know they're there. We had pagan and indigenous spiritual representatives from Judaism, from the Hindu Federation, Sikhs. The Tony Blair Foundation was there. We had 2 members of Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Islamic Affairs with their flowing capes enter our gathering and stand with the rest of the religious leadership. A lot of people were there. So, how about Christianity? We were represented in spades. In fact, we were the most represented at the G8 World Religion Summit in 2010. And I mean, we were the most represented, including the evangelical community. So here's just a small list of the representation that was there. And this is a listing that more or less acts as an umbrella for the majority of the world evangelical community. Pretty big. I'll let your eyes feast on that while I take a drink. Yes, and Jim Wallace was one of our keynote speakers. Yeah. So what did we talk about? I was an observer at this event. What did we talk about? That we all need to coexist. That we need all religions to work for unity, for the common good, and for world peace. That global financial governance is necessary, such as a world taxation regime, a new international economic order. The representative from the Salvation Army described it this way in terms of global economics. It's not about having a bike for each. It's about learning to share one bike in community. Great. I think I'll walk. Thank you. A lot of talk of eco-justice, that what we need to do is develop a gospel of respecting nature. Some of the talk was like this: we are the biggest parasites on earth. Earth loyalty and an earth-generated eco-spiritual ethics was very strongly encouraged. And all of this would be geared towards empowering the United Nations, because somebody's got to do this. Somebody's got to manage it. And at this point, that seems to be the gathering place. This is politics. This is politics and religion for world unity. And all of this was couched in the umbrella of social justice. Well, here's one that's a little bit newer. I did not go to it. I wish I had. Didn't have the ability to, but it was a big one. I watched some of the online feed. That is the World Alliance of Religions, its peace summit, which took place in South Korea between September 17th to September the 19th, only a few months back. Who here knew about this one? Hands up. One, no hands? No? Yes, Joe did? Okay. Wow. All right. This was a doozy. Its opening was held in the Olympic Stadium in Seoul, South Korea. 200,000 people were there for the opening, which was as grand and as extravagant as any Olympic event you could imagine. Over 700 religious representatives from around the world came. 50 heads of state, former heads of state, and high-level politicians also attended. What was the point? The point was to draft a declaration that all religions must unite under God as one. And then to draft a declaration calling for international law enshrining that ideal. Will it happen? I can't say. Just like the United Religions Initiative did not become what it intended to be, this might not become what it intends to be. But the very fact that this exists and is happening demonstrates at the most basic level that mankind is working towards unity on every front. So what about technology then? We've looked at politics, we've looked at landscape, architecture, we've looked at religion. How about even technology? Can we find oneness, world unity in terms of technology? I know we're really changing here quite a bit. But yes, it's there as well, demonstrating that this concept of world unity from the Tower of Babel to our new Babel is very much alive. So the idea here is transhumanism, that through our technology, through our engineering, we can perfect ourselves. It is premised on the idea that evolution is first of all true, and that as conscious beings, we can therefore direct evolution through our science and our technology. We will work out our own perfection through the works of our own hands. We, as humanity, are poised to remake not only humanity, but Earth itself. We will create a new order. And man plays God, man becomes God. And the technology is varied that fuels this dream. And I'm not against technology. I mean, my goodness, the vehicle I drove in, I am thankful for that technology that brought us to Dallas. I like my Apple, even though there's a bite mark taken out of it. I'm not opposed to technology, but here we're seeing the idea of technology integrated with a philosophy, a spiritual philosophy. And so the various gizmos and gadgets that fuel it include things like brain-computer interfacing, which is already an old technology that's just becoming very more refined. Advanced robotics. Even the idea of space travel fits into this idea. Cybernetics. Cognitive enhancements. My first taste of transhumanism was in 2010 when I attended the Mormon Transhumanist Association's conference back in Salt Lake City, and we went to as basically a fly on the wall to see what was transhumanism all about. And after the very first session, or the very first day of that conference, which was entitled Fear and Trembling at the Tower of Babel, okay, the theme is there. One of the other speakers said this: we are now at a Tower of Babel return point. Anything we imagine, we can do. There's nothing out of our grasp now. Fascinating. Now, why would the Mormon community be interested? And by the way, last year, 2013, I was brought to Salt Lake City. I spoke to the Mormon Transhumanist Association as a Christian critic of religious transhumanism. And while I disagree wholeheartedly with their worldview and their philosophy, their spiritual beliefs, I agree or disagree wholeheartedly with their transhumanist goals. They were very hospitable. They were good hosts. And I can count some of them even as friends. And we don't agree at all, but we can at least be friends about the fact that we are in some pretty much, butting heads over things. But it was a very good, very, very good, and a little bit of a nervous experience walking into Salt Lake City, knowing that you're kind of the guy, the one man against transhumanism, speaking to a Mormon group who view transhumanism as the scientific validation of their theology to become as gods. So there's the reason why the Mormon community was interested in transhumanism. Anyways, this is so fascinating to me because here it boiled down to this idea that we are uniting through technology. We are creating literally a Tower of Babel return point. Here's one quote from Mark Swaney in Singularity. Is a spiritual singularity near? November the 2nd, 2010. As our understanding of technology grows, so does our understanding of the spiritual universe. Our conception of God has formed and reformed into the shape of our technology. Not only that, spiritual figures are seen as a master of current and future technology. Profound technological change and profound philosophical change are intermingled. And yes, they are. I'm going to quickly just jump back to 2010 when I went to the first Mormon transhumanist event. I remember sitting in one of the sessions, and there was a lot of talk of creating the hive mind, how we will all be integrated with brain-computer interfacing, and we will connect to the global network. And I walked out of the room, and the event was held at the University of Utah. I remember walking out of the room, going to the library, because I love books, checking out some of the stacks during a free period. And it hit me, there's really nobody in the stacks, there's nobody checking out the books. I walked into the commons area, and I remember back in the 80s and 90s, if you would go into a commons area in a university setting, there's a buzz. There's people talking, there's pages flipping, there's giggling, there's joking, there's visiting. Things are happening. I walked in, it must have been about 200 people. Dead silence. Complete, utter silence. What was going on? Everybody was basking in the glow of their laptop, earbuds, and texting. And it hit me, we are networked. Here's the cyborg. It was sobering because, you're realizing, all right, our world is really, really changing. And this change is fueling this idea that through our science and our technology, we can become one. I experienced this in a big way last year at the Global Future 2045 Congress in New York City, which was a host of rock stars of transhumanists, including Ray Kurzweil, the Director of Engineering from Google, senior officials and senior scientists, people from Oxford, from MIT. This was the creme de la creme of the global computer and high-tech industry come together in New York City to talk about human evolution and how we can decide our next steps as we evolve through our technology and our science. It was a very eye-opening experience, let me tell you. Here's just some of the things that was talked about. We talked about brain-computer interfacing, neural connections, brain mapping, brain re-engineering. Here in the picture you see one particular individual, Dr. Ishuguru, and his Geminoid, the person beside him. Which one is a person? One is an advanced robot who moves and interacts with its environment around. When a light switch is flicked on, the Geminoid is already checking it out, checking out the lines. Where did this come from? Who's walked into the room? At one particular point, we're doing interviews in a hotel across from the conference center. And Dr. Ishuguru and his Geminoid were there, just a few rooms down the hall, being ready to go into another interview. And a hotel staff person walked by. And I stopped that person. And I said, "Did you see the robot?" Now, okay, what kind of a freak asks a question like that? Did you see the robot? And the guy actually stopped. He said, "What are you talking about, dude?" I said, "That, right over there. That person in that chair, that's not a person. That's a robot." He said, "No way, no way." I said, "Do yourself a favor. Check it out. Walk by." Unfortunately, I'm hooked in. Otherwise, I'd show you what he had done. He sauntered by, okay? You just don't walk up to somebody and stare and say, "Are you a robot?" It just doesn't happen. So he sauntered by and just, checked it out. Didn't take long, and he was like, eyes big, jaw on the ground. And what was he doing? Pulling out his smartphone that had him completely globally connected. He was going click, 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 send. Big thumbs up as this Geminoid robot thing was staring at him, checking him out. Bizarre world. Really bizarre world. Brain-computer interfacing, as I said, that was one of the technologies we talked about. Brain mapping. Incidentally, your country, Russia, India, China, the European Union are throwing hundreds of millions of dollars into brain mapping, reverse engineering the brain, the attempt to do this. And what was fascinating at this particular event was the acknowledgement that we don't understand consciousness. This is a very complex problem. There are millions and millions of neural connections in the human brain, and to map all of this is going to be an astronomical task. This is the next race to the moon. However, one of the other scientists, I'm not sure which university he was from, made an interesting observation. He says, we have mapped the roundworm. We know how many neural connectors exist in the roundworm's nervous system. 302. We've studied it. We've mapped it all. We know it inside and out, backwards and forwards. We know it, and we don't understand it. And I'm like, we're fearfully and wonderful made. Good luck figuring the brain. Good luck with your idea of reverse engineering this incredible creation that God has made. And there's one of the most advanced robotic arms on this particular individual. All of this, we saw stellar pieces of technology at this particular event. But what was so fascinating was not the technology, but the worldviews around it and the political aspirations around it. And in fact, one of the reasons why this event was held in New York City was that there was a public appeal to the United Nations asking the UN to be the management body for a global transhumanist movement, because we need some way of controlling, some way of bringing this all together. So in this picture you see Peter de Mendes, he's on this side, the Russian millionaire who pulled this event together. You see James Martin, who was considered one of the most influential figures in the history of the computer industry, considered the fourth most influential individual And I spent time with him. I spent about half an hour with the man. He truly believed that transhumanism would cease his problem of death, that we could overcome death through transhumanism, that we could move forward. Unfortunately, about 8 days after I'd spent time with him, again, I'd spent about half an hour with the man, a very, very nice man to spend time with, he was found passed away by a sea kayaker off of his island estate in the Bermuda Islands. It didn't come fast enough for him, which was really, it actually hit me pretty hard. I'm like, oh, I just spent time with this guy. I just spent time with him doing an interview. I just spent time with him walking down the street and talking about all kinds of stuff. And now, his hope, his transhuman ideal, gone. Just like that. And then, Peter Diamandis is on the far side, the founder of the X Games, and the one on this side is Dmitry Itskov, the Russian millionaire. These are some of the people who are involved in this event, and the political call, the political recommendation that there is some type of international management regime for some type of unifying approach to the issue of transhumanism. And of course, there was spirituality. Spirituality from beginning to end. In fact, the very first presentation talked about spirituality, talked about the necessity of becoming transhuman so that we could now experience a full spiritual awakening. And the very last part of the presentation, the very last part of this Congress, was an interfaith presentation with different religious leaders, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, sitting around talking about transhumanism and the need to recognize that we are becoming as gods through our science and our technology. The world will unite. We will become divine. We are divine. We just haven't realized it yet. So we talked lots about the idea of becoming God-men, developing a godlike civilization. One of the participants said, "You are the light. You are the truth. You are the beginning. You are the end." Hey, I know whose words those are, and they're not yours. We can't even be original, can we, when we try to declare ourselves as God? Wow. You know, this is off track, but if we're gods... By the way, have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror? Of course you have. Looked at yourself in the mirror in the morning. If we're gods, what kind of sorry gods are we? I got a bum knee and a bum hip. If I was a god, I'd take myself back to the god store and get a refund. Seriously. Anyway, sorry. I want to close with one other area of oneness. And this one really hits home. And this is the cultural side of oneness. The very fact that we are now celebrating our human unity. We are literally, and I'm not saying this in a metaphorical or symbolic sense, literally celebrating our human oneness, our divinity, in festivals, in celebrations and events around the world. You know, we've come a long ways when we can do it to this extent, when we are literally celebrating oneness. So here's a list of a few events that celebrate global unity and oneness. Mankind transforming and being transformed through what's called transformational festivals. Burning Man. Hands up. Most people, I'm sure, here have heard of Burning Man. A handful. Not that many. Wow, okay. You need to check it out. Seriously. This is the Petri dish of postmodernism. By the way, it also tells me that postmodernism is more or less gone. We're entering a new era. And if you want to talk to me personally about that later, that's fine. But even these people who are involved in this recognize postmodernism is passing. We've entered a new age, an age of re-enchantment. Here's a list of just a handful of these festivals. Boom, Ozora, the Maitreya Festival, Universal Religion, Rainbow Serpent, Sonic Bloom, Wicker Man, Lightning in a Bottle. For most of you in this room, it means nothing. It will mean something when we're done the next few slides. So these are festivals, transformational gatherings. They incorporate the idea of community and unity coming together as one to celebrate our oneness. They are 3 to 10 day gatherings, and after that they dissolve. The idea behind these events is radical tolerance, non-judgmentalism. I can understand the appeal, and you'll see there's appeal. I understand the appeal completely. This is a place where you can be anything you want to be and literally experience a new reality. At these events, you often find sacred spaces, temples, shrines, and I mean full-blown temples. The idea is that it will help you to incorporate a new harmony with nature. Most of these events take place in grand natural settings, mountain valleys, deserts, large beach landscapes, and you feel like you are one with nature. Yoga and various spiritual practices and encounters are a very fundamental part of the transformational movement. A lot of trance dance music. In fact, the dance floor becomes a sacred space. And it's not all just EDM, electronic dance music. There are other music forms as well. But electronic dance music, EDM, is the primary vehicle that's used. It's considered an experimental journey. We are literally modeling a new reality. This is our new shared experiment in what reality could look like. There's visionary art, interactive art, there's seminars, lectures, and everything from yoga and kundalini all the way up to permaculture and how to blog and everything in between. And all the way through, it's about transforming culture. And here's the thing to keep in mind. They are just simply mirroring what you believe. Not you, but your neighbors. They're just mirroring what your family believes. They're just mirroring what your children believe, what your education system teaches. Jeet Kay Lung, a Canadian who is one of the most well-recognized in the transformation movement, says this: it's not just the idea of the world we want to live in, it's the actual experience. I know some of you are already going, I don't get this yet, Carl. You will in a minute. Trust me. How big are some of these events? Well, Lightning in a Bottle, Southern California, 15,000 people. Ozora, 35,000. Burning Man, this year was over 70,000 in the northern desert of Nevada. And there you see the one image of the man. That's this year's picture from Burning Man. 70,000 people coming to celebrate. And there's all kinds of reasons people come, but the underlying motive, the underlying reason, the reason that the organizers give is that this is the idea of transforming reality and creating a sense of global community. Bonnaroo! Who here has heard of Bonnaroo? Who here is from Tennessee? No hands? One hand. Okay. Bonnaroo, South Central Tennessee, 90,000 people come together for the Bonnaroo Festival. Glastonbury in England, 280,000 people. There's a picture of Glastonbury on the corner, an 8.5-mile perimeter around the festival. Tomorrowland, which is a concert, but has transformational themes in it, particularly human unity. 360,000 people come together, mostly young people. You'll see a clip of that in a moment. Where? 3 locations. Next year's 3 locations. This year was 2. One in Europe, in Belgium. The U.S. branch of it, Tomorrow World, takes place just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Had 140,000 people this year. And next year there's going to be another one in Brazil. This year the event was so large in Europe that they had break it up into two weekends. 360,000 people came together. So where do these events take place? I've started charting them just for Canada and the U.S. And by the way, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these events. From a few hundred people to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. I've slowly began charting them. I'm maybe halfway done, a third of the way done. I've got a long, long list more to work through and spend time researching and plotting on a Google Map chart that I've been working on. Right now here, it doesn't look like it, but there's about 100 events right there. Many of those pins are pins on pins on pins because sometimes there's 4 or 5 events in one year in one location. So this is in your neighborhood, as it is in mine. I'm going to take you to 3 transformational festivals. Listen to what they're saying. Remember, we've always had dance. We've always had parties. We've always had music. Don't let that become the distraction. Instead, listen to what they're saying. The last one, Tomorrowland, will be a little bit different. But here we go. Here's Boom. Here's a Boom Transformational Festival. 25,000 attend. It's noted for its workshops, its tribal vibes, its sacred spaces. What does it look like? We'll take a little peek.
There is no word to explain the vibration, the feeling that's happening here. Suddenly, you have come into a whole new reality of a human family.
We're creating kind of a fantasy, mirage, a vision of what reality could be like, or how we would wish that reality was more like.
I come from France.
From Hamburg, Germany.
South Africa. England.
Why do we came to Boom?
Dance.
You are not separate. Everybody around you is somehow the same being. The planet is not separate from ourselves either.
There you go. We're all together. Even part of the planet. That's Boom. That's Boom. I'll take you now to another one. This one's Lightning in a Bottle, Southern California. By the way, you have them in Texas. In that map I showed, you have a number of them in Texas. Lightning in a Bottle takes place in Southern California. Started in the year 2000. About 15,000 people attend LIB. It's noted for its Temple of Consciousness, and it is especially noted for its incredible art, its visionary lighting, and its sacred spaces. Here's Lightning in a Bottle, just a little clip of one of their trailers, one of their teasers.
If we could just take lightning in a bottle and make it bigger and turn it into a city, I would live in the rest of my life.
A spirit introduced himself to them, one who can do wondrous deeds to assist in their spiritual development.
What would you be doing if you could do anything in the world? Anything that you couldn't do if you're normal? I just want people to be happy, that's all.
And he traveled around the world and helped certain people. How could we become more light? How could we become more like the sun?
Other people on other planets, they're all a part of a family, and we're all family.
So if you want to find something, you have to put the intention, and your energetic self can have a direct communication with its origin, the sun.
This earth is our mother. If there were no water or earth or grass, we wouldn't be here.
Give something back to the sun, to the earth. We dance as best we can, dress up as best we can. The energy of the fire is in your heart. Every one of our hearts is directly connected. Every time your heart beats, my heart feels it. And so does everybody else's. Feel your heart, not your mind. Then you can begin to transmit a feeling.
I think love is an energy in a higher vibration. When we have love and we just contact with someone with love, they can feel it and they'll be happy. And if someone's sad and you come in their energy field and you're happy and you give good energies, they'll come be happy. Once one person's happy, another person's happy, and then another person's happy, and then everyone's loving. All of us together in harmony.
There you go, lightning in a bottle. Well, you know, Woodstock was labeled an Aquarian festival. This is just simply remaking it, except a whole lot bigger in some cases. Yeah. Here's Tomorrowland. Now, Tomorrowland is not a transformational festival. It is a music event. It's a concert, but it does have a transformational theme, and that is the idea of global unity. It's put out in their promotional material. It's put out in their videos. It's even celebrated within how the stage settings change, and the stage talks and literally preaches oneness and unity. How many people go to Tomorrowland? It's huge, just massive. 180,000 people last year in the Belgium event. This year, 360,000. In fact, last year's event, this is kind of remarkable. Last year's event sold out pretty quick. If, let's say, a big name singer came to the Dallas area, I don't know, I'm not even sure who's popular right now. Throw out a name, anybody. Okay. Willie Nelson. Thanks, Joe. If you two and Willie Nelson came together and came to Dallas, how fast would those tickets sell out? Not very fast, right. I went to a Willie Nelson concert. My goodness, the guy went for 3 hours straight. I give him credit that way. But how fast do you think last year's Tomorrowland sold out at? 180,000 tickets. One day, 10 minutes, you're all off. Tremendously off. One right. Whoever said 1 second is right. Fastest in human history or noted history. Over 2 million people clogged the lines for 180,000 tickets, and it sold out in a second, reportedly under a second. So this year they had to restructure the ticketing system, and 360,000 tickets sold out in just under an hour. It's the place to be. So here's a clip from Tomorrowland. Now, this does not have a lot. This has no talking. This is dance. This is music. This gives you a sense of the size, how big it is. Remember, the big theme, the overriding banner is unity that Tomorrowland operates under. In fact, they have their own airline fleets that bring people in from around the world. It's a big event. So the first part is part of their promotional clip, just setting you up. They have their own mythos. They truly have a mythos built into it. And then you get a sense of what the event looks like. And it is certainly energetic.
Towards the end of July, a brilliant scientist discovered the stars were in perfect alignment to make the next step in the evolution of consciousness. He guided us to a mystical land between the shadows of wonder, to be part of an astonishing gathering in the history of our planet. Travelers from all corners of the world followed the astronomer in his footsteps, where the spirit of the mountain was revealed, and all our dreams became reality.
So what have we learned? We're basically out of time already. I realize that. I've gone over. My apologies. There's a lot here that we've learned, I hope. Number one, when it comes to transformational festivals, you're not going to be able to compete with that. Don't. Your message is truth, not entertainment. Your message is truth, not human unity. And we need to be careful that we don't sacrifice truth under the cause of unity. So here's a few quick thoughts. I'm going to give you a fast quote, and then I'm going to continue on as we wrap up. Here's from Lucille Green, who was a World Federalist. She's passed away. She bridges this together nicely. A new consciousness is also emerging from a growing awareness in the West of the wisdom of the Eastern worldview. Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and Shinto. Perhaps we can learn through them to see the world whole as it is, and together, West and East begin to build the foundations of a new world order. The most urgent item on the planetary agenda is to set the limits of freedom and order in supranational global affairs. A constitution for the world is needed, which combines the achievements of both hemispheres. That is, constitutional limitations and a Bill of Rights from the West, and a spacious worldview from the East. Yes, we have a Tower of Babel syndrome, ladies and gentlemen. It goes all through history. And we are living it now in very new ways, but it means the same thing. Quickly, let's respond. First of all, what do we get out of this? Well, we need to recognize that this is our historical continuation of our sin desire. And I will suggest something here as well. It's easy to look at this and point our fingers. But what we do collectively, we already do individually in our own hearts. Keep that in mind. This is just a reflection of our sin condition and the desire to be in charge of our own destiny, to literally build our own order. Ecclesiastes is right. There is nothing new under the sun. And then don't be gullible participants. I hate to say it, but I've seen and interacted with many Christians involved, especially in the political and the interfaith side. And by the way, there's even 2 transformationalist type festivals that are Christian in orientation. They're both emerging festivals. One is the Wild Goose Festival. I believe it's in North Carolina. So we have to take that serious. We really have to take that serious. Don't be gullible participants. And then guard our own hearts. Because as I said, what we do collectively, we do individually. So we need to guard our own hearts against our own social pride, the fact that we can build our own order, create our own kingdoms, however that may look, be it in our businesses, even our churches. Guard against our own pride, against our own good works. I think Francis Schaeffer was very correct when he said, "It is my hope that this generation may turn from that greatest of wickedness, the placing of any created thing in the place of the Creator, and that this generation may get its feet out of the path of death and may live." The demand of human unity is that you stay quiet regarding the exclusive message of Jesus Christ. And I have seen this personally at interfaith events and even the political side. This divides. You divide. Jesus Christ divides. And this is the reason that the world hates us. Because it hated Christ first. Don't expect a lot of tolerance or love. I'll close with a couple of quick passages, because this puts us back in the right perspective. Thus says the Lord, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, I am the first and I am the last. Besides me there is no God. Is there a God beside me? Indeed, there is no other rock. I know not one. Here's what we need to do, because this is the world we face already right now, and your children face. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. He will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. Something we've lost. Fear the Lord. Shun evil.